Ever look at the map of the Pacific Northwest and think, does this chunk of the planet just feel like it should be its own thing? Well, congratulations, you're on the same wavelength as the Cascadia Movement, a plucky dream of turning portions of the North American states of Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, and a few neighbors into one glorious bioregional utopia. But beneath the rain-covered profile of the vast region and the rather wacky idea of its development as an entity of its own, lies a risk of natural disaster that could unleash a devastating fury upon the entire North Pacific Northwest. That includes not just the densely populated urban centers of Seattle and Vancouver in the Americas, but also the cities and towns of areas several thousand miles on the other side of the Pacific Ocean. The term Cascadia refers to a bioregion of approximately 1 million square kilometers, that's 386,000 square miles, extending all the way along the eastern coast of North America from Alaska down to California. A bioregion is a place defined by natural characteristics rather than by man-made geographic boundaries. According to One Earth, other examples in North America include the Great Plains and the Mexican drylands, while examples from other parts of the world include the Mediterranean, the Palearctic tundra, the sub-Saharan Afrotropics, and Australia. Simply Australia. Cascadia is named after the Cascade Mountains, a 700-mile-long group of peaks that run through the bioregion, incorporating California's Mount Shasta, Oregon's Mount Hood, and the tallest of all, Washington State's Mount Rainier. And although the geographical extent of the bioregion is somewhat loosely defined, it is generally accepted to run between the Copper River in Alaska as its northern boundary, all the way to Cape Mendocino on the California coast, about halfway between San Francisco and Portland. Its lateral boundaries are the Pacific Coast and the US and Canadian states of Wyoming, Montana, British Columbia, and Yukon, although, again, this largely differs according to definition. The human population of the vast region would be around 17.5 million people, predominantly living in the area between Vancouver and Portland, which has been referred to by some as the Cascadia megaregion. Cascadia is otherwise sparsely populated and abundant with all kinds of natural features, including dense forests, volcanic mountains, lakes, non-volcanic mountains, rivers, waterfalls, lots of wildlife, indigenous communities, and a whole lot of rainfall. And amidst its vast and abundant natural resources, the region does present rather spectacular economic prospects. By combining the economic potential of present-day Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia alone, Cascadia as a separate entity would generate an economic yield of more than $1.1 trillion in goods and services annually. This would likely increase if the vast natural resources of the landscape were exploited, especially its vast supply of timber. And it would increase yet further still if portions of Northern California, Idaho, and Southern Alaska were included, all of which would collectively make Cascadia one of the largest countries in the world by landmass, roughly equivalent in size to Mongolia, with a population equivalent to that of the Netherlands. And such an idea is not merely a pipe dream. In fact, it has been advocated for decades by a group known as the aforementioned Cascadia Movement. According to the online website, Cascadia Now! The origins of the idea for an independent nation in the Pacific Northwest date all the way back to the early 1800s and to the time of third President Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson congratulated businessman John Jacob Astor on the establishment of his fur trading post, Fort Astoria in Oregon, and had referred to it as the Republic of the Pacific. The website claimed that this was a serious endorsement of its potential existence as an American-settled entity which would be separate from the contiguous United States, both economically and politically. The idea saw discussion in various academic circles at intervals throughout the rest of the century, largely hinging around the great economic potential of the as-yet unnamed region due to its fur trade and land fertility, when compared with the largely arid American Midwest. The name and geographical boundaries of Cascadia appeared in the 1970s, having been thought up by David McCloskey, professor of sociology at Seattle University. McCloskey also created a map of the bioregion, first published in 1988, which he nicknamed A Great Green Land. The Cascadia Movement was established 2 years earlier with the hosting of the first Cascadia Bioregional Congress at Evergreen State College in Washington State in 1986. A motley collection of left-wing activists and indigenous leaders, the movement did gain some minor momentum in the following years. It became a sort of grassroots initiative linked to sustainability and market reinvention, and in 1995 it saw the creation of a regional flag commonly known as the Doug flag. The Doug flag is a tricolor combining a blue stripe for the sky, Pacific Ocean, and Salish Sea, white stripe for Cascadia's clouds and snow, and a stripe green for the region's fields and evergreen forests. A Douglas fir also adorns the flag. The movement continued to gain traction into the 21st century and even converted itself into a fledgling political framework advocating independence. In 2016, the Cascadia Party of British Columbia formed and ran 2 candidates in the region's general elections, advocating sovereignty for the Cascadia bioregion. And in 2021, the Cascadia Bioregional Party was established, which also advocated for the independence of the bioregion from the US and Canada, alongside several social, environmental, and economic reforms. With that said, the Cascadia movement has become something more like a cultural gimmick, and as an independence movement, it's not going to go anywhere. While the Doug flag sees regular use at environmental rallies, farmers' markets, and by fans of the Portland Timbers Football Club, the plan for Cascadian secession bears very little chance of fruition. Not only would it require separating from 2 countries simultaneously, but from 2 countries historically not very supportive of secessionism. Think about Quebec or perhaps the American Civil War. Moreover, Cascadia's would-be territory would just happen to include some of the most economically productive areas of not just the US and Canada, but really the entire world. Areas which neither country is going to give up. Neither independence party secured any representation at local or national level, and the strength of its secessionist drive is largely based on some sympathetic opinion polls and a few online petitions, most of which were ultimately withdrawn. Now, wistful notions of independence to one side, there is a reason why the Cascadia bioregion could, and probably should, be in the public eye for rather more terrifying reasons. You see, Cascadia just happens to be home to a ticking time bomb lurking off the Pacific Northwest coast. That is the Cascadia subduction zone, a 600-mile-long tectonic fault line which stretches all the way from Vancouver Island in Canada to Northern California. A subduction zone is a place where 2 of the planet's tectonic plates collide and one dives beneath the other. This makes the Cascadia subduction zone a sort of zipper beneath the ocean, where the Juan de Fuca plate is gradually sliding beneath the North American plate. And the potential of this natural collision may have the power to put paid to civilization as we know it in the region. You see, Cascadia isn't prone to tectonic tremors very often, but when they do occur, they occur with a kind of force that would make the Richter scale cry. Scientists estimate that the force of an earthquake in Cascadia could reach a magnitude of 8 to 9, strong enough to shake and destroy practically everything in the surrounding area. For context, the strongest earthquake in recorded history is 9.6 on the Richter scale, occurring in 1960 off the coast of Chile, which resulted in between 1,000 and 6,000 casualties and which created tsunamis so strong they affected not only southern Chile, but places as far removed as Hawaii, Japan, the Philippines, eastern New Zealand, and even southeast Australia, as well as Alaska's Aleutian Islands. And therein lies a clue to the great threat posed by the Cascadia subduction zone. The force of any movement between the Juan de Fuca plate and the North American plate would generate waves which would lay waste to everything in its path with reckless abandon. We're talking waves taller than your average skyscraper, racing toward the coast at jet speed. This would represent nature's way of saying, move inland yesterday. But how likely is this to occur? Well, the last Cascadia megaquake hit in 1700, long before written records existed in the area, but within the window in which such events were being recorded thousands of miles across the water in Japan. In the evening of January the 26th, Cascadia threw the ultimate tectonic tantrum, and what followed was one of the most epic earthquakes in history, a magnitude 9 megaquake that literally reshaped the landscape and left its mark on both sides of the Pacific Ocean. The quake began in the Cascadia subduction zone and shook the region for around 5 minutes, turning forests into matchsticks and coastlines into swamps. As one would predict, the Earth's sudden movement displaced massive amounts of seawater, creating a tsunami that rampaged across the Pacific and reached Japan around 10 hours later, swiftly laying waste to seaside villages and seafaring communities. Japanese records spoke of an orphan tsunami, a huge wave with no apparent earthquake in their region to explain it. But back in Cascadia, oral histories from the First Nations people told of thunderous shaking and great waves swallowing the land. With the advance of time, modern science connected the dots and revealed that the 2 events were part of the same geological drama. The 1700 quake took place over 300 years ago, uncomfortably close to the average interval between such monster quakes, believed to be every 250 to 500 years. The probability of such a massive quake in the next 50 years is about 12%, about 1 in 8, which is very, very far from insignificant. The Great Cascadia earthquake of 1700 was an astonishing reminder that the planet is a drama queen and that the Pacific Northwest is sitting on one of her favorite stages. Cascadia is quiet now, but history and tectonics tells us it's just biding its time for the dramatic sequel. And another such quake, with the vast amounts of people and infrastructure now inhabiting both sides of the Pacific, would likely be nothing short of dramatic. With 17 million people living in the Cascadia region alone, millions could be affected by the quake and its aftershocks. Coastal towns, especially those closest to the fault line, and not least the 1 million people inhabiting Vancouver Island itself, would face the worst of the destruction, and the ensuing tsunami could wipe out entire communities in minutes. Hundreds of thousands could be left homeless, their homes destroyed by the quake or inundated by the tsunami. Temporary shelters would struggle to accommodate the massive influx, and tens of thousands could be subject to injuries and fatalities, particularly if the quake would strike during the day when cities are bustling. Hospitals and emergency services, overwhelmed and potentially damaged themselves, would be stretched to breaking point, and access to essentials like clean water, food, and medical supplies could be cut off for weeks, with roads, ports, and airports rendered unusable. With all that in mind, Cascadia, despite its picturesque landscapes and abundant flora and fauna, should be considered one of the world's least assuming pressure cookers, and a location that the Canadian government, American government, Japanese government, and even the would-be Cascadian government would do well to account for. Thank you for watching.